Now it's time for the Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking you, who is the greatest threat to global stability? Is it not the UK, but is it America? Is it China? Is it Russia? Is it Iran? We're living in a very cruel society. The conflict between Israel and Hamas continues to spiral, as reports say more than 700 Palestinian children have reportedly been killed in Gaza. The war between Russia and Ukraine nears 600 days and seems to be no closer to conclusion than the day it started, hidden in the news agenda due to events elsewhere, of course. And meanwhile, Russia, China and Iran continue to expand their nuclear war chests. In such a volatile world, I'm asking, who is the greatest threat to global stability? So I'm joined now by Will Geddes, security expert, Sunil Sharma, Chief Operating Officer, and the Conservatives' Friends of the Commonwealth. Also joining me, Greg Swenson, Chair of the Republicans Overseas, and Anthony Glees, Security and Intelligence Expert from the University of Buckingham. Right, so I'm going to start with you, Sunil. What is your thoughts then? I've offered 4 places that we think are a potential threat, but in your view, which of those would you say is the greatest threat and why?
I would lean towards the United States of America. I think as the leader of the free world, when you currently have the weak leadership that they currently have, I think it enables a lot of leaders across the world to make bold, erratic decisions that kind of lead to power grabs and ultimately innocent people dying. If you look at the last 3 years in particular of the Biden administration, you've seen so much turmoil that's occurred. And prior to that, the amount of stability with 4 years of strong leadership, we saw North Korea and South Korea doing a peace treaty, unprecedented peace treaty. We saw the Abraham Accords, with the Middle East finally looking to look at a peaceful solution. We saw Russia being contained. We finally started to understand the threats that China have. Fast forward today, we see, North Korea supplying military weapons to Russia. We see the Middle East in flames. We see China mulling over Taiwan. Incredible instability across the world. So I think when America is weak and ineffective, risks across the globe, and it makes it a much more safe place to live.
So now I'll come back to you, but your audio sort of dipping in now. I'll go over to Anthony Glees. He's the security and intelligence expert from the University of Buckingham. What are your thoughts, Anthony?
Well, my thoughts are that right now, literally right now, the peace of the world is hanging by a thread because of what is going on in the Middle East and what is likely to go on in Gaza. And our fear must be that the Israelis will kill a very large number of innocent people. We understand why they feel they have to do it, but it doesn't mean it's the right thing necessarily. And that could lead to a wider war. It could even lead to a world war. We have the template of World War I in 1914, where one thing led to revenge, led to other people coming in, to a general mobilization, and 22 million people dead. So the immediate threat undoubtedly lies in the Middle East with Israel and Gaza, and let us hope that restraint prevails, the hostages are returned, and then Israel can go after the Hamas terrorists as it is entitled to do and indeed must do. However, I don't think that's going to happen, frankly. So beyond that, if the world does not blow itself up over Gaza and the Palestine-Israel problem, for me, the big threat is Russia. And Russia is a big threat because it is a revisionist nation. It's the major revisionist nation. That is to say, it is not content with where its borders are right now. It wants to change them back to where they were in 1990. And that inevitably will involve a massive conflict with NATO. So going forward, and we're keeping all fingers and thumbs crossed, if the problem in Israel and Gaza can be contained, the next big issue and the perennial issue over the decade is likely to be Russia, not China, not elsewhere in the Middle East at this point. No, that's my view.
You could argue that the threat, though, with regard to what's going on now, is actually funded by, a lot of people are saying it's funded by Iran, so that would be the reason why all this is sort of coming to surface. Let's go to Greg Swenson there. Greg.
Yeah, I think in the near term, it's clearly Iran because of what's going on in the Middle East. Long term, more Russia because they've got 4,300 nuclear weapons, and of course China with 450 ships in their navy and clearly having expansionist views. They both have declining populations, so maybe in the very long term we shouldn't be as worried, but surely in the medium term. But more importantly, it's the combination of the three. It's this unholy alliance, this sort of axes of evil that are developing and quite aggressively in the last few years, but especially with this conflict in Gaza and Israel. You're seeing Iran working a lot with the Russians. They're supplying the Russians with weapons, and they're also buying a quarter of their weapons from China. So there's a real unholy alliance here.
Okay, let's go over to Will Geddes.
So I think I would break it down into three particular areas, and I think some of the other guests have mentioned some valid points, and I'd certainly go with Greg on some of the key issues that he's raised there. I think there's humanitarian, there's combat, and there's financial. I think in terms of humanitarian, obviously the Middle East right now. I think in terms of the combat, yes, the whole situation, the world is watching, obviously, what's going to happen between, obviously, Israel and Palestine, but especially Hamas. There's going to be huge displacement of for the plight of certainly the Palestinians. But I think certainly I would say that Iran is probably the smelting pot of causing a lot of trouble and disruption, certainly in the area. They are vectored into a number of different disparate and semi-organized terrorist groups in terms of funding, financing, and helping them in terms of their operations and propagating their agendas. I think Russia certainly still plays a very valid part, I think mainly led by ego and also by the fact that Putin is going to be very difficult to displace. But I think financially, in the longer term, China presents the greatest threat. It's a far more stealthy approach, but certainly I think the issue of Taiwan is certainly not off the table, and that is, again, something that we're going to have to watch very carefully.
Greg, I'm going to come back to you. What about America, though? Isn't America, especially with Joe Biden at the helm, we saw the withdrawal of Afghanistan. Yeah. We've seen that where America is weak, Trump was able to maintain some sort of stability in the Middle East, and many said that because of it in the Middle East seemed to be stable. What about America?
Yeah, there needs to be some leadership there, and I think what we're seeing in the Middle East this week is what you can expect with a world where the Americans are not leading and they're not the most powerful force. It's the greater force for good. And so Biden made some major mistakes. You mentioned Afghanistan. This is the wrong time to be cutting defense spending. So U.S. defense spending is down to below 3% of GDP. It's 12% of the federal budget. That's outrageous. And the best way to prevent war is to prepare for war. And Biden clearly hasn't been doing that for the last 2 years. Maybe this is a wake-up call. We're glad to see the Gerald Ford on the way to the Gulf. That was commissioned years ago, and it shows you how valuable strength is, and peace through strength should be the major policy of the U.S. and the West.
I'm going to finally, final word to you, Anthony. Having seen all this, then, in your view, what do you think could be done to sort of prevent this, what we're seeing at the moment in terms of what's going on in Israel and with Hamas?
Well, I totally disagree with the argument that America is not leading. America is leading right now. Anthony Blinken is the smartest person that I've seen in American politics for a long time. Yes, Afghanistan was a fiasco, but it was of Donald J. Trump's making. I think if Trump were to be re-elected, America could become a threat simply by disintegrating. All friends of democracy want a strong America. Twice last century, America saved Europe. The First World War and then the Second World War. And we need to encourage America to show leadership because it's a democracy. And the big reason why Russia is a threat, a big threat, Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons, of course, is less of a threat. But democracies are the surest way of safeguarding peace. Democracies do not attack other democracies. Wow. So if we can make democracies work, then we can live in a better world. If we don't, God knows where we'll end it.
But you just mentioned Trump. You thought that Trump was a risk to security. Didn't he keep the Middle East calm? I mean, that was a big thing about Trump. Sorry, we've got to go to the news, unfortunately. But that's what I thought. I mean, am I not wrong? you know.
No, excuse me, I think you are wrong, because Trump was chaotic. He even wanted to pull America out of NATO. Sensible Republicans want a strong America, and yes, Biden is very elderly, but Antony Blinken, he's strong, and he's urging restraint on Israel right now. If they had any sense...
Okay, well, listen, I'm going to let Greg have 10 seconds, because you can come back on the Trump thing very briefly, then I've got to go to the news.
I think Blinken and Biden are saying the right things the last few days. Their natural impulse last Saturday morning was to urge restraint, which is in many ways urging surrender. And so what Biden is doing in the last few days is great, although he did not mention Iran once, and they have basically funded both sides of Ukraine, Russia, because Iran is sending weapons to Russia. So by stopping the sanctions, they gave up $50 billion in oil revenue to the mullahs that didn't exist 2 years ago, thanks to relaxing the sanctions and horrible U.S. energy policy.
So am I wrong about Trump, yes or no? Am I?
No, you are right about Trump. We had more peace and prosperity. I don't really want him to be re-elected either. That's not my...
He doesn't want to be re-elected. Listen, I've got to go because I've got to run to the news. We're getting late. Will Geddes, thank you very much. He'll be in throughout the show. Sunil Sharma, thank you so much to you. Greg Swenson and also Anthony Glees. Really good to talk to you. Thank you for your thoughts.